Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone, welcome to the CSBP Grow Better podcast. My name's Johnston and I'm really excited to be joined for a special edition today talking about green ammonia and all things net zero in the world of fertiliser. We've got Charlie Day, CEO of Jupiter Ionics, and his colleague Doug Macfarlane, CSO, Chief Scientific Officer at Jupiter Ionics. Charlie, Doug, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us on, Gray. Yeah.
Now, we'll give you both a chance to introduce yourselves. So Charlie, maybe if I turn to you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you ended up in the green hydrogen industry?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Charlie Day. I'm actually a chemical engineer by training. So a long time ago, several decades ago, as an undergraduate, I learned about the Haber-Bosch process, which is how we make all of our ammonia today. And then for the next few decades, I went on a career journey at the interface between business and universities, helping to get technologies out of the university and into use. And then a few years ago, I was introduced to Doug and his team to help them think about how to take their technology out into the market. And I guess, as the saying goes, I like the technology so much, I joined the company and became the CEO and have been working with Doug for the last couple of years since we founded the company.
Fantastic. And Doug, sounds like you've been on a journey with this technology too?
Absolutely. We've been interested in our research group at Monash University for quite a long time in what can we do with renewable electricity to make effectively fuels, especially things like green hydrogen. And we've supported a couple of spin-outs in that over the years. But then about 5 or 6 years ago, somebody exposed us to the idea that with using similar kinds of technology, you can also make ammonia. And that started a journey for us that ultimately has led to us getting the technology really working quite well, and then spinning out the company with Charlie's help, and here we are today.
Really exciting to be here and to talk about green ammonia, because we are starting to get a lot of questions from growers about what is green ammonia and what is its potential. If we take it up a level and start with ammonia, why it's important and its application particularly in agriculture, do you mind just providing us the background on ammonia, how it's produced currently, and really then what's the problem that Jupiter Ionics is trying to solve?
So ammonia is effectively the starting point for the production of all of the man-made nitrogen-based fertilizers. So whenever we talk about a fertilizer with its N content, the ammonium sulfate, ammonium phosphate, urea, ammonium nitrate, these all come ultimately from ammonia. And that ammonia is made in very large chemical plants called Haber-Bosch reactors, using as effectively an energy source and also as a source of hydrogen, natural gas, or even worse, sometimes coal. But ultimately, the fertilizer is a fossil fuel product. And it's responsible for, globally, it's responsible for something between 1.5% and 2% of global CO2 emissions, just to manufacture, no other stage of the whole fertilizer process, just that manufacture. And therefore, greening up the fertilizer industry becomes quite an important imperative for sustainable farming.
Ammonia then is the source of the N, as I understand, that is used in fertilizer in almost every industry across the world.
That's right. Other than sort of natural manures and composts, etc., if it's a man-made fertilizer, it's come from ammonia.
And so the core of your business or your research program that is, as I understand, spun into a business is really addressing that problem and figuring out how can we shift from a natural gas or coal-based way to produce that ammonia, very energy intensive, to a energy intensive but possibly renewable energy intensive way of producing that ammonia.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Yeah.
And I guess everyone will be now just wanting to know, is it going to work? What's the, do you want to tell us a bit more about what's the journey you've been on and how does it work and how prospective does it look?
So let me explain that there are effectively two ways to make green ammonia, in other words, using sustainable energy and cutting out the fossil fuel from the process. One way is to make green hydrogen by standard electrolysis type processes, and then use that green hydrogen in the Haber-Bosch process, the traditional process. So that works. That's coming along, and I think there are rapidly developing plans in Western Australia to produce ammonia that way. But nonetheless, it's a very large chemical plant consuming massive quantities of power when it's working. All of these are large-scale concepts that need to be implemented. Our approach has got a very different flavor to it. We skip the hydrogen part of this story. We use a device that is very similar to a hydrogen producing electrolyzer. So it's a little electrochemical cell, as we would call it, a bit like a battery, but we're putting power into it. And by feeding nitrogen from the atmosphere around us, that's where the N comes from, and a fair bit of energy, we produce directly ammonia. And that's what we're working on. And we're doing that now at increasingly high efficiency and very competitive rates, such that the prospects of doing this on various levels of scale, from quite small, from the sort of scale that you might use to run fertilizer into a commercial greenhouse, for example, that small, plugged into the wall and doing that, all the way up to broadacre farming and beyond.
What's the limiting factor at the moment, I guess? Why is there something that's stopping this technology being adopted, or how far away do you feel we are from getting some widespread adoption? Because it sounds very exciting.
Well, I guess we just have to figure out all of the engineering challenges in all of the scale up as we do all these things on larger and larger scale, and thinking about all of the what we call balance of plant. In other words, the power, the water. The water is another component, of course, in the process, and so on. There's lots of engineering challenges in this. It's not just easy to go from a gram to a ton. So we've got a few steps along the way on that journey. And
those are the kind of steps, I guess, you're focused on at the moment at Jupiter Ionics?
Correct. Yes. So I sort of skipped a step there, which is that after we had what you might call our first academic successes in the academic labs on this, and by the way, there's a very I think interesting YouTube video. If you just search Monash ammonia, you'll come across a YouTube that people can have a look at and understand, and actually have a look inside our labs, basically see what we're doing. But that's very small scale, and taking that out of the lab and getting it basically onto a farm is what we're up to at the moment.
Does that mean you've got some pilot applications working with some renewable energy?
Not working yet. Renewable energy is always the core of this, of course, but we do have a plan towards that in a project that we're working with Wesfarmers on. Our first site will be a grape grower in northern Victoria, up in Mildura, and our plan is to have a device on his farm next year.
So you mentioned Wesfarmers there and the involvement that Wesfarmers Chemicals, Energies and Fertilisers and CSBP have had. Can you tell us a little bit more about the partnership there and how partnerships are important to getting Jupiter Ionics off the ground and working?
We were fortunate, as mentioned earlier this year, to win a government grant from the CSBP program, which is one of the federal government grant schemes, and that's a partnership grant scheme. And through that grant, we were able to form this partnership with Wesfarmers. Really important for us because, as Doug has said, he's been working on this, he and his team in the lab for many years. But as we get closer to the point of actually deploying it into the field, we need to really understand how that actually works in an end user context. How would farmers put this into practice? What are some of the practical implementation issues that we're going to confront? And of course, Wesfarmers have unrivaled expertise and knowledge in that space. So for a small company like us to be able to tap into that expertise and that knowledge early in our development path is incredibly valuable. And that will inform some of that engineering scale-up work that Doug was mentioning. As we learn more about how farmers could put this to use on their operations, we can tailor our research and make sure we're delivering a product that really delivers benefits.
So you've started there to lead into, I guess, some questions that really will be of interest to our growers, which is, it's all very well talking about a green ammonia, which is already a big step in terms of improving the efficiency and the emissions intensity of their end product. What are the concepts you have for how that ammonia could end up getting into a form that can be applied and then can become plant available?
Obviously, once you've got ammonia, other fertilisers, as Doug mentioned before, are all derivatives in one form or another of ammonia. So we're looking at a range of possible end-use products, the nitrates that people will be familiar with. In America, for example, direct use of anhydrous ammonia is quite common because ammonia is more available. We see less of that in Australia, and certainly on the West Coast, very little of that. But we're interested to understand whether that could be used more widely if you had the anhydrous ammonia available. So we think that not only can we bring changes in the carbon profile in the fertilizer that people are using, but we open up a bit more flexibility in the types of fertilizer that people might be able to use.
So it sounds like ultimately we understand ammonia is the feedstock for urea, for UAN, our FlexEN we call on the West Coast, could end up becoming a feedstock for any of those kind of products. But as Doug alluded to, some engineering challenges to solve along the way. Yeah,
certainly. As this is one of those classically developed in a lab. So I think that we can make milligrams or micrograms of ammonia in a test tube or in a coffee cup sized reactor, and farmers need to make kilograms and tons of the stuff, and so there's quite a lot of scale up engineering that goes into moving from grams up to tons, and we've got a team of very smart scientists and engineers working on that in the lab today.
Can you give us a sense of that team? What's the scale of Jupiter Ionics and what's the breakdown of your team and what are they up to?
Yeah, so we've got about a dozen people in our team right now, and they're mostly scientists and engineers, so PhD qualified electrochemical scientists and engineers. We've got some chemical engineers, an electrical engineer in the team, and they're collectively refining the technology and solving problems basically as you scale up each step of the way. It never quite works the way it did at the smaller scale, so you've got to problem solve all the way up. And then in addition to that, we've got partners like Wesfarmers, who are bringing complementary expertise to the table, who can help us along the way as we do that design work. But we've gone from effectively Doug and I a year and a half ago to now being a dozen people, and certainly our view is that, particularly in light of what's happening in Europe at the moment, with sort of fertilizer prices being through the roof, we think that the demand for green ammonia is going to scale even faster than we thought it would even a year ago. So our team's going to continue to grow. We're always looking for more talented scientists and engineers to join the team.
Very exciting. I'm sure you might get some resumes sent in based on our broad listenership. Doug, also you both mentioned the Haber-Bosch process, and Doug talked before about the efficiency of your process and how it's working. Can you give us a sense of how the two are stacking up? Like, is your process stacking up pound for pound with a conventional ammonia production at the moment, or are we in front? Are we behind?
In terms of energy, so there's lots of different ways, different metrics, if you like, to answer that. In terms of energy, we're behind at the moment. In other words, it takes a bit more energy. Of course, it's electrical energy, and it's coming from solar or wind. So exactly what the cost of that is the key question, more than anything. So if that is very low cost because it's coming in at 3 a.m, and our process can kind of cycle up and down according to the electricity supply, but it's sort of in a straight drag race, so to speak, then we're not going to beat Haber-Bosch. That's actually very efficient. But of course, it's using effectively a compound, methane, which has been produced by nature over hundreds of millions of years. So it's got a great start. It's got a head start, is the way I would put it.
Yeah.
In other words, but it's also important to mention that that's the energy cost side of it, which is in some ways you could think of ammonia, if you think of it as a liquid. It's relatively easy to liquefy ammonia. And the cylinder of ammonia, or the tank of ammonia, looks a little bit like an LPG tank, right? And pressures and so on are about the same. So nothing too dramatic there. And the anhydrous ammonia that Charlie talked about on farms in the US and to some extent on the East Coast here, using sort of medium scale tankers literally behind the tractor. To deliver that's liquid ammonia being injected into the soil. But the point is that you can think of liquid ammonia as being effectively a liquid electricity. So there's a lot of electricity has gone into it. But of course, the capital cost of the kit that makes it is literally the other half of the story. And in the case of Haber-Bosch, because it only gets economical in the Haber-Bosch case because it's very large scale. So 1,000 tons a day is the sort of number that those plants produce. So if our drag race actually is of a certain size of vehicle, meaning a small one, a farm-sized vehicle, we'd win.
Building on what Doug was saying there, a couple of the other benefits of our approach is that if you think just about carbon emissions, the current model for making ammonia and fertilizers is you make it in a very large centralized factory and then you ship it from wherever that factory is to the point of use on the farm. And there's a lot of carbon emissions, a lot of diesel goes into the trucks and the ships and things that transport the fertilizer from the point of production to the point of use. And so, we're excited by the potential to save carbon emissions in the whole supply chain, not just at the point of production. But the other thing, again, we've seen earlier this year is that because current approaches to making ammonia use natural gas as a feedstock, the price of that ammonia is linked to the price of the natural gas, and we've seen huge volatility in the price of natural gas, which is translated into volatility that I don't need to tell your listeners about. And the great thing is that the price of a ray of sunshine hasn't changed for quite a long time. And so, we are excited also that our technology can take out of some of the volatility in the price of production of that ammonia. So farmers, once they've actually installed a system, can have confidence what the price of their fertilizer will be over a long time period.
So you touched there, Charlie, on decoupling from gas markets and possibly from some benefits from a decentralized approach. And Doug, I'm just keen to tease out a couple of other things you briefly mentioned in your answer, which was the benefits of ammonia storage versus hydrogen storage, and the benefits of a process that can scale up and scale down versus having to run a Haber-Bosch, which, as I understand, a Haber-Bosch has to run at very high temperature and pressure kind of constantly to keep it working. Do you want to just elaborate on those a bit more, Doug?
Yes, in fact, those are two matters are quite connected. But starting with the second of them, is that one of the characteristics of these big Haber-Bosch plants is that they really do like to stay running full tilt the whole 24/7, which means that if you try to run it on green hydrogen, then given that renewables intrinsically are variable, whether it's wind or solar. I mean, hydro is a great answer if you've got lots and lots of hydro, but that's not the case for most of us. So accepting the intermittency of renewables, then your hydrogen supply, if it's coming straight into the plant, the Haber-Bosch plant, is variable, and that's a problem for Haber-Bosch. Right. So the solution to that is to store some of the hydrogen so that you can smooth the intermittency in the form of the hydrogen, and that's expensive. Storing hydrogen in large scale, and we're talking very large scales there, is expensive. So that's one of the aspects then where our process, which can vary quite happily and can actually just stop dead. We've shown that recently in a very dramatic way, and just idle. when the power is not available, that is all sort of quite routine in a cell such as ours. That gives us a big advantage in terms of how the whole system then has to look compared to the green hydrogen sourced ammonia.
So feels then a couple of key benefits from the path that Jupiter Ionics is going down, an electrolyser approach to ammonia rather than an electrolyser approach to hydrogen and then a conventional ammonia production. Does that mean, though, that is the quid pro quo or the trade-off from that perhaps that we may take a little longer to develop this technology, or you're hoping to bring this to market at the same pace at which the proponents of green hydrogen and ammonia are talking about?
Yeah, certainly. I think the trade-off is that our technology is less mature. So, today you can go out and buy a water electrolyzer to make the hydrogen, and obviously you can plumb that into your existing Haber-Bosch plant. Although interestingly, it's challenging to do that at the kind of scale that a Haber-Bosch plant requires. So, even the biggest electrolyzers in the world struggle to supply a Haber-Bosch plant. So there are challenges in scaling up even that approach to it. But yeah, our technology is a few years yet before it'll be ready for prime time. But that's really why we formed Jupiter and why we're working as hard as we are to bring it to market as quickly as we possibly can.
It's been a really fascinating and in-depth discussion that I'm sure our growers will get some benefit from. And I'm sure that they will also be wanting me to ask you to put a stake in the ground and just let them know when they're going to be able to buy some green fertiliser from you. Have we got any sense of that timing? I don't think we'll hold you to it, but can you provide a viewpoint for the West Australian market?
Well, as Doug said, we're hopeful to have a prototype out in the field next year, and then we'll be working on that prototype to develop a commercially saleable device probably in the year or two after that. So I think we're still a few years from being on the market, but one of the great things about being partnered with WesCEF is that we think we'll be able to bring it to market quite quickly once the product is ready. So I'm sure we'll be working closely to bring it to market with WesCEF when the time comes.
Any other messages that you feel our growers should be aware of?
So something that came to mind while Charlie was answering just one of your recent questions there, Gray, was that if any of your listeners are really interested in sort of the history of fertilizers and the history of the Haber-Bosch process, there's a really good read. It's a book called The Alchemy of Air, AIR, air. And I can't remember who the author is. Charlie might remember. And it's the story of, well, it starts off with the story of fertilizers, guano and so on, before Haber and Bosch came along. About 100 years ago was when the Haber was only 100 years ago, all right? And then it spends quite a long time, this book, on the trials and tribulations of first Haber and then later Bosch in Germany, trying to get this technology established. And it feels like that's where we are right now.
Not to put yourself in the same company, but well done, Doug. You've positioned yourselves standing on the shoulders of giants.
Absolutely.
And great, just to pick up on that, it is interesting because in a way, and this book, the author was Thomas Hager, by the way. The book tells the story of the impetus for Haber and Bosch to develop their industrial process was that the world was running out of guano, bird poo, which was the original source of a sort of nitrogen-based fertilizer. And the way I see it, the world is now running out of carbon budget to use ammonia produced in the traditional way. So there are parallels in the sense that we're running out of something. In our case, it's carbon capacity in the atmosphere. For Haber and Bosch, it was running out of guano. But we need a solution as a world to keep us all fed and keep the population stable. So that's what motivates us every day.
It's a wonderful message, and we talk about that often at CSBP Fertilisers, which is, humans and animals need protein to eat, and at the moment that protein is coming from synthetic nitrogen fertiliser at its heart. So we're really pleased to hear about the story that you guys have to share around the work to make a synthetic nitrogen fertiliser using a renewable energy source. And we're really pleased that CSBP and Wesfarmers Chemicals, Energies and Fertilisers can be involved in the story and play our own little part in hopefully bringing that to life. So with that, we will let you get back to the important work that you're doing, and we'll say thank you on behalf of our listeners for joining us, Charlie and Doug. And that's it. That's been the CSBP Grow Better podcast for today. I've been Gray Johnston. As always, please jump into our DMs with any feedback you'd like to share or any suggestions for the show. And remember to keep listening, subscribe, rate and review. But for now, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Doug. Goodbye.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn.